Hello, welcome to Deep Space Games. I'm Mike. I just want to say thanks for tuning in to the Blender setup and Quickstart tutorial. Basically, we're just going to be going over where to get Blender, how to set it up, generally speaking, and specifically getting Blender set up so that you can easily follow along with all the future Blender tutorials here on Deep Space Games. Go ahead and open up any browser and navigate to blender.org. Basically, they've got a big download button right here you can click. And then from here, you just pick which mirror that you want according to whatever operating system you're running, Windows 64-bit or 32-bit. If you're in the USA, you can use the USA mirror. It works just fine. You can click on it, save it. Just go through, follow the prompts, use all the defaults. And I'm not going to do that because I already have it done. Once you do that, you're going to end up with a Blender icon just like that. So you can go ahead and pause the video, download Blender, and when you're done, go ahead and hit play again, and we'll pick right up right from here. Okay, so you've downloaded Blender, and now you've got this fancy little Blender icon here, which you're going to double click to open up Blender. Okay, so basically, you're always going to be prompted with this dialog box. There's a bunch of links here. They're useful links. Can't say that I really use them that much, but who knows, you might find them useful. They also give you a list of recent files that you've edited inside Blender. That'll be right there. And then interaction is just a set of defaults for how the controls work. I would say for the most part, especially if you're brand new, just leave it to Blender default. If you're used to 3ds Max or Maya and you want those exact same kind of controls, then you can play around with that, but I just use the Blender defaults. To dismiss the dialog, just click anywhere. This is what the default Blender scene that you're going to get right here. To be honest with you, it's not that useful. You're not going to usually want to start from here. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean up this this editor, which is this is a 3D editor right here, and we're going to get it set up for how you'll want it to normally load when you load Blender. And again, I just want to allude to the fact that these windows are called editors in Blender, and this specifically right here is a 3D view that we're in. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up the controls, because right now the way Blender is set up, you would have to right click on stuff to select it. It's kind of unnatural for me. So one of the first things I do is I set up a left click select. So to do that, we're going to go up to File, we're going to go to User Preferences, and we're going to go to Input. And right here it has Select With. You can see it's selected right. Just click left, okay? And then make sure you save your user settings. We're going to be coming back to this kind of a few times through this video, and then hopefully opening it and closing it will get you used to where it's at. There's a ton of different preferences that we'll be setting up in here, just so you know. But now if we go back, we can actually left click. I'm left clicking. Oh, you know what? I'm going to do two for you. I am going to set up screencast keys. Okay, what this does right here is if you look in this bottom left-hand corner, you can see, like right now I'm mouse scrolling. You see how it lights up there? If I left click, it shows you I'm left clicking, or right click, and then any keys that I click, it shows you right here. So now we've got the left click set up, okay? The next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to get the scene set up to open the way we want it to open up. It's a little too cluttered. This is not a normal setup, especially for making game assets. It's not really useful, so we're going to get this cleaned up. This right here, this lamp, I pretty much never use a built-in lamp, even when I'm rendering here in Blender. So the first thing that I do here is I just, with it selected, I hit the X key and I choose delete, it's gone. The camera we might have some use for later on, so I usually keep that around. But what I do is I go ahead and hide it. But before I hide it, I want to point something out here. We've got this 3D manipulator here called the 3D Gizmo. It's showing you, you know, X, Y, and Z coordinates, RGB, red, green, blue. It tends to get in the way. I don't use it. It's not, Blender doesn't force you to use it. So I pretty much keep it turned off all the time. You can see this little button right here turns it on and off. So I would suggest go ahead and click it, get it out of there. And then we can come over here to the outliner. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here, and I'm actually just going to hide the camera. Okay, this cube, chances are a lot of times we'll start with a cube. I just think, again, it kind of gets in the way. So I hit the X button, I delete it. So now we've just got a blank grid. Something I want to point out is, even though this is a perspective view of the 3D scene, this is basically a front view right here. So if you can see the 3D gizmo down here, it shows you the Y. Looking down the Y-axis, this is the front view. Just so you kind of, it's a good thing to know. Now from here, I think there's a little bit of distortion in perspective view when you're looking here. So I'm going to use the properties region, which is a menu here, and there's a couple different ways to get to it. You can click on this plus sign to open it, and then you can also toggle the N as a Nancy key. You can see down here N to open and close it. What I like to do is I set the lens at 60. I just think there's a little less distortion. I like the way it looks. And I tend to think that the grid's a little small. So the other thing I do, if we come down to display, we hit the drop down so it opens up. I change it to 32 lines. Okay. So now right here, this is the default scene that I like to start with when Blender opens up. And we can actually tell Blender that every time we open up Blender, we want it to start here. And the way we do that is via the startup file. So to save what we have right here, for our startup file, you just come over to File, and it says Save Startup File. And then if you click right here, Save Startup File, it's just a confirmation. Now this is saved into our startup. So I'm going to show you here, I'm going to close Blender. And now when I reopen it, you're going to see that it opens up exactly the way that I like it. Okay, a couple other things here. The timeline view is specifically used for animation. I don't really use it down here. I don't like it down here. So I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm going to kind of touch on the first interaction when you're interacting with these different editor panels in Blender. You can see there's this little triple dash line here. And what this does is it allows you to open new editors. And you can actually get in trouble really fast. If you notice, you can be opening and closing, and you can really get yourself into a mess. So the way that you get rid of an editor is to also use this. And what you have to do is the editor, you can collapse editors into other editors, but to do that, they have to be within the same dimension that you're collapsing into. And what I mean by that, if you notice here, this editor has it's 2 dimensions vertically. I cannot take this and collapse it. If I try to drag this, it will not let me. So I've got to get this, if I want to collapse this editor into these 2 editors, I first have to clean this up so I have 1 vertical editor. And to collapse an editor, what you do is you left click on these and you drag towards it, and you'll see that little arrow pop up, and it allows you to collapse an editor. So now since these are on the same dimension, then I can collapse these. But let's say I decided I don't want to do that, I want to collapse this one. You can then drag back and forth, and I can collapse to the left. So then again here, collapse here, and now you can see I can easily get back to the same view that I had. So the reason I showed you that, because ultimately what I like to do is I like to just collapse the 3D view into the timeline editor, because I don't use it much. And again, I don't ever use it down there. I use it in a slightly different place. I have my own little setup, my own little layout for that. But I'm going to come back to the startup file, and I'm going to save it so that way when it opens, I know it opens that way. So one of the things I just kind of touched on was toggling the properties region here to the left with the N key on and off. This area over here is called the tool shelf. And basically it, for all the basic tools, it has additional options for the tools that you're using. And you interact with them here. And then if you have the Blender has this notion of add-ons, which are additional tools. Like example, this Bool Tools is an add-on I use. It also shows up here. So that is also collapsible. It's toggleable by the T key, so you can toggle that on and off. Okay. Kind of touching back with the editors. Another point I want to point out is you can switch any editor to any type of editor you want at any time. All the editors have these buttons right here for the type of editor that it is. This is a 3D view. This is the properties panel, not region, but panel. And then this is an outliner, but I can change this to a 3D view if I want. You can see here it's a 3D view. I can change it to a timeline. We can change it to basically a node editor, anything that we want. You know, we're gonna go back to the outliner here. But you can basically, UV editor is another one we'll use quite a bit. But this is how you switch in between editors. So Blender's really powerful. You can kind of customize your view because there might be a time where you want the UV editor, you know, here, like what I just did. The UV editor, you know, on the left-hand side, so you can watch it at the same time you're using a 3D view like this. And let's say, oh, you're like, oh, this feels uncomfortable. You can actually come over here, switch this to the 3D view, and then switch this to the UV image editor, and then you could readjust, zoom in and out. And then again, you know, you can collapse one way or the other way to get back to one editor. So now I want to dive into a few of the preferences to set up. And I'm going to kind of do that through demonstrating a couple different things here. A couple other things under preferences. Let's see here. Editing, the global undo steps, I think they start out at 32. Just want to up that right to the 256 maximum so you get the maximum amount of undos. It does actually have an undo and a redo, and they're separated by modes, which we'll definitely get into in another tutorial. But it just Control-Z to undo and Control-Shift-Z to redo. We talked about the input. The add-ons here. So there's some add-ons you're definitely going to want to add. The most important ones being, let's see here, the inset polygon, the loop tools, the relax, and the UV squares, which are all under the mesh. So it's set to filter by all now, but if you go down to mesh, you want to add these. These are very powerful tools that make your workflow when you're modeling a lot easier and when you're UVing a lot easier. So definitely add those in. And the way you just add it in is you just click it, and once you click something, it's activated. So, oh, you know what? I forgot to reactivate the screen keys too. Go back to the screen keys. So you'll definitely want to activate those, but just by clicking on the box. Let's see, that was in the mesh section. Node, okay, Node Wrangler, that's in the node section. So if, again, you could filter by node if you want up there. But the Node Wrangler is something that you'll use quite a bit. It's pretty powerful. Object Bool tool, super, super important. It does something specific that's really hard to do without it. So you definitely want to enable that. The speed, Rotopo, don't add that. That's one I use on occasion, but I don't use it all the time. The render is always default there. And those should be all the add-ons that you need to use there. You know, so when you're done, once you add them all, make sure you save the user settings so that they stay. Themes, you can actually change the Blender theme. I would say definitely in the start. It's, I don't know. I used to change the theme. There's a couple I like, but I just stick with the basic one. It works fine. The contrasting colors are perfect. And then for system, this is kind of important here. The CUDA. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, any recent one, you're going to want to enable CUDA. Initially, you'll see the set to none. What that does is you're going to end up doing some rendering in maybe cycles, a little bit in Blender render, just to take a look at what's going on with what you're creating. And this uses the graphics card instead of the CPU. You'll get a faster, better render using CUDA. So make sure you enable that and then save the user settings. Okay, that is really about it. That's the basic user interface with Blender. That's how to get it set up. And if you followed along and made the changes to your Blender and you saved the startup file, you're going to be all set up for all the future tutorials here on Deep Space Games, because this is kind of the default setup that I use. It'll just be a little bit easier to follow along. So I just want to say thanks again for tuning in. If you got any questions, if it's YouTube, go ahead and leave them in the comments. If you're on our blog, you can go to the bottom of the post and use discuss. And you can also hit us up on Twitter at Deep Space Games with a Z. The S was already taken. And if you just want to talk about game development in general, and we've got time, we'll definitely engage with you. We'll definitely talk about cool game stuff, whatever you want. Just remember, don't sweat it, keep debugging, and have a good one.